Hey guys, I'm Dougley, and today I'll be responding to everyone's favorite right-wing propaganda machine. Here we go.
I'm a citizen of Denmark, the Disneyland of socialism, where everybody is happy and healthy. Forget the Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, and all those power-mad Marxists who got it wrong. Denmark is the model to follow. There's just one problem. It's a fantasy. For it to be true, Denmark would have to be a socialist country. But it's not. If it were, it would have gone Venezuela a long time ago. Sorry to bring all the new fans of socialism the bad news, but that's the reality.
Okay, so right off the bat, he brings up Venezuela and the Soviet Union, two common talking points for critics of socialism. I'll have to make a video about Venezuela in the future because honestly the situation there is extremely complex and it deserves more than a PragerU response video.
Yes, it's true that Denmark has high taxes and a high level of government spending, key features of a socialist mentality. But in almost every other respect, Denmark is a full-on free market capitalist country.
This isn't true. Denmark is a mixed economy just like every other major country. And while it is true that Denmark has a high level of both taxes and government spending, a large portion of those are due to wealth redistribution in the form of welfare and other social programs. In fact, according to the OECD, Denmark is ranked 5th in the world for lowest income inequality. And it's because of this, partly, that Denmark is able to consistently rank amongst the happiest countries in the world. PragerU is framing this as a negative, when in fact, all of the results seem to be positive. Research consistently shows that income inequality is highly negatively correlated with happiness, meaning the more unequal a society is, the less happy they are. That seems pretty intuitive, but I guess not really to PragerU.
And it has some of the strongest protection of individual property rights in the world. And it's a particularly easy place to open a business. According to the World Bank, there's less bureaucratic red tape in Denmark than in any other country, except for New Zealand and Singapore. And the labor market is less regulated than in most countries.
This is the source he's referring to. You might notice it doesn't actually say anything about the ease of opening a business, but rather the most business-friendly regulations, which makes sense considering Otto Brons Petersen is the lead analyst at CPOS, I hope I'm saying that right, a conservative think tank in Denmark which promotes a limited government and supply-side economics. But I guess PragerU didn't find that little bit of information important.
Here's something you probably didn't know. There are no minimum wage laws in Denmark. It's not surprising then, or maybe it is surprising given all the misinformation out there, that Denmark ranks consistently as one of the top-ranked free market economies in the world by the Fraser Institute in Canada and the Heritage Foundation.
This is probably the most misleading point in the video. Because while it is true Denmark has no federally mandated minimum wage, Otto knows full well the reason for that. In Denmark, trade unions are universal and workers are able to negotiate fair pay for the work they do through those organized unions. They don't need a minimum wage because unlike the United States, workers aren't discouraged from joining forces to ensure they aren't mistreated. And the most damning part, their minimum wage is over twice as high as the United States on average. Otto knows exactly what he's doing by leaving this information out, and honestly, this alone should discredit most if not all of what he's saying in this video. You might also find this important. PragerU obviously doesn't, though. Fraser Institute is a conservative think tank funded by the Koch brothers in the United States. They've published material in the past denying climate change, and in 1999 they funded 2 conferences that argued the science on cigarette smoking was, quote, junk science, and that the government should, quote, butt out when it comes to regulation on the extremely harmful act of smoking. The Heritage Foundation is also funded in part by the Koch brothers, and again is also a right-wing conservative think tank. They too have denied climate change publicly, and in 2013, they, along with other conservative groups funded by large corporations, pushed the government to shut down over the funding of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Even though the foundation, Heritage Foundation that is responsible and credited with inventing the idea of an individual mandate to buy health insurance all the way back in 1989. But suddenly when it was attached to the ACA, they were against it. I wonder why. Anyways, my point is, there's a reason PragerU doesn't include sources in their videos, because then anyone skeptical enough to click on them would know just how disingenuous they really are.
So if Denmark is not a socialist country, what is it? The answer is pretty straightforward. It's a small capitalist country about the size and population of Maryland, whose citizens pay oodles in taxes in exchange for oodles in benefits. Well, what's wrong with that, you might ask? Only this. For the government to pay out such benefits, you need citizens to make enough money to pay the necessary taxes. And that's only possible through a free market economy.
This is a stupid claim that no serious economist would agree with, but I'm honestly interested, so let's hear what his explanation is.
Let me explain with some Danish history. Denmark, like its Scandinavian neighbors, Sweden and Norway, made a remarkable economic recovery after the Second World War. The combination of a highly productive workforce and, get this, low taxes created a lot of wealth. So, like every other wealthy welfare state, Denmark became wealthy before it created the welfare state. Relative to Europe, Denmark's economic high water mark was in the 1950s. Relative to the US, it was in the early 70s.
He mentions low taxes, but after the war, the USA had some of the highest taxes in its history, and it still managed to grow into one of the largest economies in the world. So I'm not sure how lower taxes definitely means Denmark would become wealthy. Those two things just don't seem to be correlated. And furthermore, I'm not sure how any of this necessarily requires a pure market economy, so where is he even going with this?
It was then, in the late 60s and early 70s, that the country's ruling elite became preoccupied with wealth redistribution. But the price paid for this social experiment was steep and swift. The expansion of public spending led to a severe economic crisis. The national debt skyrocketed. It took decades of consolidation, structural reforms, and curtailing of welfare schemes to straighten out this mess. This is the stuff you never hear about from the Danish model crowd.
Well, that's great. I'm glad he knows a little history. But I guess he skipped the class where they went over the cause of the recession that he mentioned, because in the 1970s, it wasn't just Denmark. The 1973 oil crisis, where the price of oil rose from $3 a barrel to $12 globally, was the largest cause of the recession, and it had nothing to do with Denmark's welfare programs. I've literally found this out on Wikipedia, so the only way to reframe this to be about welfare is an intentional misreading and intentional misinformation. And how was the price steep exactly? If paying higher taxes means having the happiest people in the world, isn't it worth it?
The sharp tax hikes and spending also sparked a widespread popular revolt and led to the emergence of the tax protesters party, Fremskridtspartiet. Even though the party no longer exists, the widespread desire to cut taxes remain.
This just isn't true. There isn't widespread calls for tax cuts in Denmark. In fact, the organization that Otto is part of is one of the most vocal advocates in Denmark for tax cuts. In non-conservative real life, the truth is most people in Denmark are actually fine with their high tax rates. The attitude in Denmark towards taxes is far different than it is in the US. They see taxes as an investment into their quality of life, not the government stealing their hard-earned cash.
It's worth noting that the welfare state originally began with government pension payments to the elderly. These social security-like payments are now in the process of being overtaken by private pension savings plans, the Danish equivalent to a 401k. That's right. In reality, Denmark is gradually moving away from US-style social security. It can't afford it. Denmark, the so-called socialist model, is returning the responsibility for retirement savings back to its citizens.
Another lie, or rather a half-truth, because while it might be true private retirement accounts may be becoming increasingly popular in Denmark, their social security program, as he puts it, is absolutely not going anywhere as of April 2019.
And what about healthcare? Free, right? Nothing is free. Danes pay for their healthcare through their high taxes. Private healthcare insurance is available, however. It's becoming more and more popular as long wait times associated with government-run medical care becomes less and less popular.
Yes, Otto, nothing is free. It's good to see you putting your economics education to good use. People in Denmark do pay for their healthcare through high taxes, but what might interest you is that per capita, Denmark spends $5,280 on healthcare, whereas in 2017, the US spent $10,224 per capita on healthcare, nearly double what Denmark spends, and they have universal healthcare. Explain that, Otto. Private healthcare is responsible for a disgusting amount of suffering and death in the United States, and it's something I feel very passionately about. When I hear someone arguing in favor of companies putting a price tag on someone's life, it makes me cringe and wonder what their other motivations might be. Long wait times are one of the most common criticisms of universal healthcare. I appreciate the concern, but conservatives constantly lie about it and make it seem way worse than it really is. Wait times for elective surgeries in countries with universal healthcare are high, but it's not like if you have a heart attack, you're going to be sitting in the waiting room for hours. That doesn't happen. But what does happen in the US, medical bankruptcies, a lot of them. In fact, medical expenses are the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States, because if you don't have insurance for whatever reason, including being too poor to afford it, you could potentially be saddled with a 6-figure medical bill if you need emergency medical treatment. People die in the United States because they don't have access to healthcare or can't afford it. Maybe when you tell the whole truth, Denmark doesn't seem so bad.
But in a welfare state, education is free, right? Well, that's another thing about free. It doesn't mean ideal. Almost 1 in 5 parents in Denmark chooses to send his or her children to private schools, paying part of the bill themselves. Yes, college is free, and even includes a living allowance. But there's a growing problem of getting students to graduate. Many wish to stay students and be supported by the state. One of those welfare state problems socialists don't like to talk about.
I haven't seen any significant evidence from any credible sources about Denmark struggling to support their student population. Not only that, Otto, you're an economist. You know the benefit education can have on society. I don't know why you're pretending not to. Education opens up high-skilled jobs for native people in Denmark, and the resulting labor vacuum actually raises wages for low-skilled workers, because the supply of their labor is decreased as people become less willing to work low-skilled jobs. It's a win-win for everyone, but you'll never hear that side of the story from PragerU, just the price. But that's not how spending money works. If you spend $1 billion on healthcare a year, and less of your citizens die, that's probably money well spent. But spending $1 billion on a pen that dispenses bacon-flavored ink, for example, might not be such a great investment. When you focus solely on the price, you stop the conversation about whether or not it's actually worth it, which is exactly what PragerU aims to do with videos like this.
And again, all this free stuff comes with a price. The average Dane pays 50% of his income in consumption and income taxes. That's right, I said 50%, while earning 15% less than the average American. After taxes, an average American has a 27% higher disposable income than a Dane.
So again, 50% of their income means nothing without knowing what that 50% is actually converted into in society. It might be that Danish people are more than happy to pay these taxes in return for what the state provides. And in fact, that actually is the case. According to, I'm going to butcher this and I'm sorry to him, Mike Viking, the chief executive officer of the Happiness Research Institute in Copenhagen, he says, quote, "The reason behind the high level of support for the welfare state in Denmark is the awareness of the fact that the welfare model turns our collective wealth into well-being. We are not paying taxes. We are investing in our society, and we are purchasing quality of life."
Don't get me wrong. Grey windows aside, Denmark has much to recommend it. It's just that being a socialist paradise isn't one of them. I'm Otto Brøns Petersen, economist for the Center of Political Studies in Copenhagen, Denmark, for Prager University.
So, is Denmark socialist? No, but it never really was, and no one thought it was, especially not an economist like yourself, Otto. But their system of welfare is objectively better and more effective than the United States, and their low income inequality is one reason why their populace is so much happier than the United States. This video may seem innocent at face value, but the point of videos like this isn't actually to change your mind. The high production value and the often misleading credentials of the people presenting the topic lends false credence to the idea that anything PragerU produces is well-sourced and well-researched, when in fact they are not. But hey, that's just what I think about it. I fucked up like half of those.